A poor widow begged, "Please bury my child." The mountain man's response will shock you. Montana Territory, winter of 1874. The sun sank behind the jagged spine of the Bitterroot Mountains, its dying light burning red against a sky smothered in snow. Wind howled through the pines, a mournful cry across the endless white. Beneath that storm of ice and silence, a lone figure trudged forward, small, frail, and nearly swallowed by wilderness. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. Though no one had spoken it kindly in a long time, her dress, once blue, was torn and stiff with frost. A threadbare shawl clung to her shoulders as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, clutching a limp bundle wrapped in a gray blanket. The child's head lolled against her chest, pale lips still, lashes dusted white from cold. "Hold on, baby. Just a little longer," she whispered. "Mama's almost there." But the wind stole her words. Her boots, worn thin, slipped on the ice, and she fell to her knees. Pain shot through her, but she crawled forward, driven by something beyond reason. Love, desperation, guilt. For 3 days she had walked, following a faint trail through the pass. No one in Silver Creek would help her. They had spat at her feet when she begged for medicine. "Ain't nobody helping a woman who laid with an Indian," one had sneered. So Sarah left, carrying her fever-burning child into the storm, chasing a rumor she overheard at the general store about a man deep in the pines, once called Dr. Elias Boone, a Union Army surgeon turned recluse. The townsfolk called him the Mountain Man, said he was mad, dangerous, but no one else would help. By the time she saw the thin curl of smoke rising from a chimney, the world had become a blur of white and red. Her breaths came in broken gasps. She staggered toward the cabin, wind slicing through her coat like knives. "Just a few more steps," she murmured. "Please, God, not yet." Then she felt it. The stillness. The child in her arms had stopped trembling. The faint warmth pressed against her chest was gone. Her fingers fumbled to feel the girl's cheek, the small chest, no rise, no breath. Only silence. Her knees gave out. She collapsed, clutching the child to her breast. "No, no, God, no," she sobbed, voice shattering. "Please, not her." Snowflakes landed on the child's face like falling ash. Sarah kissed her cold lips again and again, tears freezing as they fell. She rocked the small body, humming broken lullabies to a child who no longer moved. Time passed, minutes, maybe hours. Somewhere nearby, a faint glow flickered through the snow. With the last of her strength, Sarah dragged herself toward it, crawling on hands and knees. Her fingers were numb, bleeding, but she kept moving, leaving a trail of crimson on the white. She reached the door, raised a trembling hand, knocked. The door creaked open. A figure filled the frame, a tall man with a thick beard, rough coat, and eyes like steel reflecting firelight. Elias Boone said nothing. He looked down at the woman collapsed on his threshold, the bundle in her arms. Sarah tried to speak, but her lips were blue, her eyes red with tears. For a moment, they only stared. Then, in a voice as thin as the wind, she whispered, "Please, bury my child." Elias froze. The storm outside seemed to pause. Slowly, he knelt beside her. His gloved hands reached for the bundle. He hesitated, then peeled back the blanket. The child's skin was pale, lips tinged blue. Her lashes were crusted with frost. Elias brushed a finger beneath her nose. Then he felt it. A tremor. A whisper of breath. He pressed his ear to her chest. A beat, weak, but there. His eyes widened. Something ancient and fierce surged in him. He looked back at Sarah, then to the open cabin. "She's still breathing," he shouted. "Come quick." The door swung wide behind him, letting the storm rush in. For the first time in years, Elias Boone's heart pounded, not from fear, but from hope. Elias Boone had not spoken to another soul in nearly a year. He lived at the edge of a granite cliff, where the wind howled like wolves and the trees stood like silent sentinels. His cabin was hand-built, Rough logs, stone hearth, no luxuries save for a shelf of old medical books, a battered trunk, and a rifle hanging above the door. The war had ended 9 winters ago, but the noise of it still echoed in his mind. Screams, torn limbs, field hospitals soaked in blood. And worst of all, the night he returned to find his own cabin burned, his wife's body left in the ashes, his son's toys half melted near the hearth. The men who did it were white settlers. They called her a traitor for marrying a Comanche sympathizer. For Elias, that word, traitor, became a noose. He hung it around his own neck, year after year. He had sworn an oath to heal, to protect, and he had failed them. So he ran, from the towns, the uniforms, the medicine. He buried the name Dr. Boone, along with his wife and child. Only his old bloodhound, Grizz, stayed with him. Only the cold ever spoke. Until tonight. He shut the door behind him, wind banging hard against the frame. Snow poured off Sarah's shoulders as she collapsed near the hearth. Elias knelt swiftly beside her and unwrapped the bundle. The girl's skin was icy, her breath shallow. He moved fast, instincts overriding memory. He stripped off the child's wet clothes and wrapped her in wool. Then he grabbed a tin cup of hot water and dipped in a clean rag, gently pressing it to her neck, her chest, her feet. He poured a few drops of whiskey into her mouth, massaged her chest in small, careful circles, then used his fingers to stimulate breath. His eyes never left her face. Beside them, Sarah lay sprawled, eyes half-lidded from cold and exhaustion. Her lips were blue, her body shaking. Elias grabbed a blanket, threw it over her, and stoked the fire higher. "Breathe," he muttered. "You have to breathe, little one. Come on." The baby gave a weak cough. A thin wisp of breath ghosted from her lips. Elias sat back, exhaling for the first time in minutes. He stood and retrieved a small glass bottle from the cabinet, an old remedy from Comanche medicine, one his wife had taught him. Crushed juniper, pine sap, and wild mint. He dabbed a bit beneath the girl's nose. The baby whimpered, then moved. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, a spark of life glowed. Elias sat beside them, back against the wall, arms crossed tight. He should not have let her in. He should have turned away, like always. He had promised himself no more pain, no more people. But her voice, those 4 words, "Please bury my child," had shattered every wall he built. Grizz lay quietly at Sarah's side, head on his paws. The firelight danced on the girl's cheeks, slowly warming color back into her skin. After an hour, Sarah stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, dazed. She turned her head and saw Elias, hunched near the child, fingers gently brushing the girl's damp curls off her forehead. "You saved her?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Elias looked up, startled that she was awake. He hesitated, then nodded once. Sarah's lips trembled, her eyes welled, and for a moment it seemed like words would spill out, but she said nothing, just watched the man in silence. Elias shifted uncomfortably. He returned his gaze to the girl. "Don't thank me," he said, voice low. "I haven't saved her yet." It was the first thing he had said to another human being in nearly a year. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but in that cabin, beneath timber and stone, 3 broken souls breathed the same warm air, for the first time. The fever came back before dawn. Willa's tiny body, though wrapped tightly in wool and warmed by the fire, began to tremble again. Her breathing grew shallow, her forehead burning hot against Elias's calloused hand. The soft pink of her cheeks faded to a worrisome gray. Sarah sat nearby, holding her daughter's fingers between her own, whispering prayers in a voice that cracked. She had never prayed so hard. Elias crouched by the hearth, grinding bark from a willow branch into powder with a mortar and pestle. He moved with speed but not panic. Every motion was precise, efficient. It was the work of a man who had tried to cheat death before, and failed too many times. "She's going to need more than warmth," he muttered. "Her lungs, they're drowning inside her." Sarah looked up. "Is she dying?" "She's fighting." Elias retrieved a second bundle from a carved wooden box near the back wall. Leaves, roots, dried petals bound in cotton string. He selected one carefully. Dark, brown, and curled. Its scent pungent and sharp. "What is that?" Sarah asked softly. "Wild sage and rabbit tobacco. Good for the lungs." He tossed a handful into boiling water, the cabin filled with a strange but earthy scent. Sarah watched, confused, as he unrolled a faded pouch containing what looked like smudged charcoal and white ash. He placed the mixture in a small clay bowl, lit it with an ember, and waved the smoke gently around Willa's body. It was not what she had expected. You use their ways," she said cautiously. "The Comanche?" Elias nodded once. "I learned what I could. From someone who believed in both medicines, before they took her." Sarah said nothing for a long moment. The fire cracked. "They called her a savage," Elias said, his voice low as he crushed elderberries and mixed them into a thick syrup. "Said she turned me wild, said I betrayed my own kind. But she was the only soul who ever saw me for who I was, and loved me anyway." He stood, carried the warm herbal blend to the child, and dabbed a few drops onto Willa's tongue. She flinched slightly, then stilled again. Sarah wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one should have gone through that." Elias turned, his jaw tight. "You know better than most." Willa stirred. Then, without warning, her breath caught. She choked once, then stopped breathing. "No, no, no," Sarah's voice broke. She grabbed her daughter, clutching her close. "Please, please don't leave me, baby." Elias stepped in swiftly. "Lay her down, now." Sarah obeyed, trembling. Elias grabbed a thin reed he had hollowed earlier, a tool he had made in anticipation of the worst. He tilted Willa's head gently, slid the tube into her mouth, and began to breathe through it in short, steady bursts. Sarah could only watch, her hands clutched in prayer, rocking back and forth as she cried. "Come on," Elias whispered between breaths. "Come on, little one." Seconds felt like hours. Then Willa coughed, violently. Her eyes fluttered open. She gasped. She cried. The sound of that cry, thin, raspy, but alive, filled the cabin like a church bell. Sarah collapsed beside her daughter, pressing her lips to Willa's forehead. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Elias leaned back, exhausted but focused, wiping sweat from his brow. Sarah looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. Her voice shook. "You're the first person who didn't turn his back on me." Elias stared into the fire, then down at the child clinging to life because he had broken his own rules. "I already did," he said quietly. "I won't do it again." The storm had passed by the second night. The world outside was blanketed in snow, pure and undisturbed. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows along the walls. Willa slept beside the hearth, wrapped in furs, her breathing soft and steady. Elias sat on a wooden stool, sharpening a blade in silence. Sarah, curled up on a wool blanket, stared into the flames as if searching for a piece of herself in their glow. Neither had spoken much since the second time Willa stopped breathing. There was a quiet between them, not awkward, but heavy, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I used to believe that God had a plan," she said softly. "That every hardship had meaning. My father taught me that. He was a preacher in Cottonwood Valley." Elias looked up from his blade but said nothing. "We had a small church. I grew up in the back room, singing hymns, reciting scripture. Folks in town called me angel-hearted." She gave a bitter smile. "But angels aren't supposed to fall." Elias set the knife down slowly. "One summer when I was 16, I got lost in the woods picking herbs for my mother. I heard the wolves before I saw them, would have been torn to pieces if he hadn't come." She paused. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "His name was Caton. He was Comanche. Young, quiet, strange to me at first. But he knew the forest like the back of his hand. He led me home, never asked for thanks." Sarah's voice dropped lower. I started leaving food by the river for him, and he'd leave little carvings, feathers, flowers. We never spoke in town, not once, but in the woods, we talked for hours. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening without interruption. I loved him, Sarah said simply. He wasn't a savage. He was gentle. He understood silence better than any preacher ever did. I told him I'd marry him when I turned 17, I thought. I thought if we told them together, my father would understand. She let out a breath that shook. But the night Ketan came to our doorstep with an offering of venison and peace, they beat him before he said a word. My father stood on the porch and watched. Elias swallowed hard. They said he died on the edge of town, but he didn't. He crawled into the woods, broken and bleeding, and died under the tree where we used to meet. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. I was already carrying Willa by then. The church turned its back. I was dragged out by my hair, called unclean, ungodly. No one would speak to me. I gave birth in a goat shed 2 towns over. Elias looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not just the weary mother or the outcast, but the girl who had once believed in love strong enough to defy a world built to destroy it. My wife, he said after a long silence, was Apache. They didn't kill her with their hands. They killed her with words, starved her spirit until it gave up. Sarah looked at him, her eyes meeting his across the room, through firelight and pain. You loved her? With every piece of me that was still good. The flames danced higher for a moment, then settled. Sarah glanced over at her daughter, who shifted slightly in sleep. Then she looked back at Elias. I thought God forgot about us, she whispered, when no one would help, when I buried Ketan with my bare hands, when Willa burned with fever, and the world just kept turning. She wiped her nose, her voice cracking. But when I saw you lean down and breathe life into her, I knew I'd been wrong. Her words hung in the warm air. Elias did not answer right away. He only nodded, once, slow, solemn, and sure. Outside, the wind was quiet now, but inside that cabin, where pain had once been the only fire, something else had begun to burn. The days blurred together in a hush of falling snow and whispered breaths. The storm passed, but the mountains remained sealed under layers of white. The world outside the cabin was cold and silent, but within those walls, life stirred softly. Elias chopped wood in the mornings while Sarah stirred soup over the fire. Together, they patched the leaking roof with pine tar and stitched blankets from old sacks. Elias carved a small wooden horse for Willa, its legs slightly uneven, but she gripped it tight with her tiny fingers. When she smiled, both adults forgot, for a moment, that the world had ever been cruel. He showed Sarah how to dry willow bark properly, how to brew tea for a cough using pine needles and elderflower. She watched with furrowed brows, absorbing every word, every gesture. In return, she sang to Willa at night, soft melodies in a tongue Elias did not know but found strangely comforting. That's Comanche, isn't it? He asked one evening, his voice low as they sat by the fire. Sarah nodded. Just lullabies. Ketan's mother used to hum them. She taught you? Sarah smiled. No. Ketan did. He sang them to me under the stars. Elias looked at her, long and quietly, then turned back to the fire. The flames cast amber light over the lines of his face, softening them. They laughed more often now, small chuckles over burnt bread, Willa's attempts to crawl across the cabin, or the way Grizz would chase snowflakes through the open door. But underneath their shared smiles, shadows lingered, wounds healed slowly in the cold. One night, as Willa slept curled against Sarah's side, Elias opened an old cedar trunk. He dug beneath a folded Union jacket and several brittle letters. From the bottom, he pulled out a small pouch wrapped in deer hide. He sat down across from Sarah and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a single silver earring, an intricate design of feathers and turquoise, unmistakably Apache. The metal caught the firelight, flickering like a tear caught mid-fall. She gave this to me the night we married, he said. Her name was Naira. Sarah looked at the earring, then at Elias. She said nothing, but her hands tightened slightly around Willa's blanket. They killed her because she loved me and because I did not stop them, he said. His voice was not angry, not bitter, just honest. Sarah's breath caught. I buried her wearing the other one. This I kept. Elias held the earring out to Sarah, palm open. I think she'd want someone like you to have it. Sarah's lips parted. Elias, I'm not asking you to wear it for her. I'm giving it to you because I could not protect her. He paused. But I will protect you. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. She reached out slowly, took the earring, and closed her hand around it as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. I don't know what this means, she whispered. It means, Elias said gently, I will not let the world take from me again what it has no right to. Outside, the snow fell silent and slow. Inside, two people, branded by sorrow, shaped by loss, sat close, the fire between them glowing steady and warm. And somewhere in the middle of the quiet, the ache in their chests softened. The mountain morning was sharp and still. Snow sparkled under a pale sun, and the air was so cold it cracked against the lungs. Elias was out front, stacking firewood he had just chopped, his breath rising in plumes. Inside the cabin, Sarah hummed softly to Willa, brushing the child's hair with her fingers. Neither of them heard the horses until it was too late. 5 riders crested the hill, coats dark, rifles slung, faces cold with purpose. Leading them was Thomas Everett, son of the preacher from Cottonwood Valley, and a man with a long memory and a wounded ego. Years ago, he had courted Sarah with righteous arrogance. She refused him. And now, he rode to reclaim what he thought was lost honor. There, he spat, pointing toward the smoke curling from Elias's chimney. The savage's whore, hiding with that mountain rat. Let's bring justice. The others followed without question. Some were neighbors, others hired hands, but all of them carried guns, and the scent of something uglier than law. Elias was just turning with an armful of logs when the butt of a rifle cracked against his temple. He dropped hard, blood spraying across the snow. They kicked him until he stopped moving. Inside, Sarah heard the thuds, her breath caught. She peeked through a crack in the wooden shutters and saw the men, recognizing Thomas by his father's preacher coat, now stained with snow. She did not scream. Instead, she lifted Willa from her bed and rushed to the cellar door behind the stove, flinging it open and lowering her daughter gently into the dark. Stay quiet, she whispered, choking on panic. Not a sound, baby, please. She covered Willa with burlap sacks and old straw. Then she closed the hatch, pressed her palm to it for a heartbeat, and turned toward the door. They burst in before she reached it. Well, well, Thomas sneered, stepping over Elias's fallen rifle. Didn't think we'd find you up here playing house with a murderer. Leave us alone, Sarah said, voice trembling. Please, we're not hurting anyone. You already did, Sarah, he growled. You shamed your family, ran off with a redskin, birthed his bastard. You think hiding in the hills makes you clean? One of the men laughed. Maybe she needs reminding of her place. He grabbed her wrist. She slapped him, hard. His eyes lit up, not with pain, but pleasure. You'll regret that, he hissed, dragging her out into the yard. The cold bit her skin, but fear numbed her faster. He raised a hand to strike her. And then, a gunshot shattered the sky. The man dropped to the ground, his hat flying off, snow puffing up around him. Not dead, just stunned. The others spun around. Elias stood at the edge of the cabin, blood running down his face, a crude piece of rusted metal still clutched in his hand, what he had used to cut his bonds. You want to fight? He snarled, voice ragged. You got one. Thomas aimed his rifle. Elias charged. The two collided in the snow, fists flying, boots scraping ice. The gun dropped. Elias elbowed Thomas in the jaw, then slammed him down and pulled the weapon free. Another man lunged. Elias fired a warning shot straight into the air. The crack echoed off the cliffs. Birds scattered from trees. The other riders froze. Elias did not shoot again. He did not have to. He charged the next one with his bare hands, striking him so hard his nose shattered. The man dropped like a stone. Another backed away, muttering curses. The fifth threw down his rifle and ran. Only Thomas remained, bloody, groaning, and dazed. Elias stood over him, chest heaving. Snow clung to his beard. His eyes were wild and shining with something raw, pain, rage, and something deeper still. "This is my home," he said, voice low but thundering. "My family. You come here again, I will bury you in this mountain, and no preacher will find your soul." Thomas whimpered and crawled away, leaving red stains in the snow. When the last horseman disappeared over the hill, Elias dropped to his knees. His breath came hard. His hands trembled. Sarah ran to him. She knelt, arms around him, forehead pressed to his shoulder. He held her tight. The blood from his head soaked into her hair, but neither of them moved. Willa cried softly from the cellar. Elias whispered, voice broken but fierce, "No one touches my family again." Smoke still clung to the rafters days after the fire was put out. The rear wall of the cabin, charred black, had to be torn down plank by plank. Snow drifted in through the open back, until Elias and Sarah worked together, cutting, hammering, patching, slowly raising it anew. They did not speak often as they worked, but each time their hands brushed, each time they passed a tool or shared a glance, something unspoken passed between them, steady, wordless understanding. Willa played near the hearth, stacking wooden blocks Elias had carved for her, her laughter soft but healing. Grizz kept watch outside, tail wagging gently, nose always to the wind. Elias's right hand was wrapped tightly, the knuckles swollen and red from the fight. That evening, as he sat at the table stitching a new door flap, Sarah noticed something odd about the cloth around his wrist. "That fabric, it's old," she said. He glanced at it. Then, after a pause, slowly unwound the bandage. The fabric was faded blue cotton, stained with time and blood. Along one edge, a tiny hand-sewn pattern of sage leaves remained, barely visible. "This was hers, wasn't it?" Sarah asked. Elias nodded. "The last thing I had left of her. I kept it wrapped around my compass for years. And now it's around your hand. I needed something to stop the bleeding." He met her eyes. "And I realized, maybe it was time to let go." Sarah stepped closer. Elias removed the cloth entirely, folded it with reverence, and pressed it into her hand. "I thought I would never trust again," he said quietly. "Not anyone. Not myself." He looked down. "But I do now." Her fingers curled around the bundle. She did not cry, but her eyes softened, her breath caught in her throat. Later that night, the fire burned low, casting golden light across the room. Willa slept, curled between wool blankets. Outside, the cold whispered against the windows, but inside, the warmth held strong. Sarah sat beside Elias on the floor, gently replacing the dressing on his hand with fresh linen. Her touch lingered, not clinical, but tender. As she wrapped the final knot, she placed her palm over his. "I came here to bury my daughter," she whispered, voice trembling, "but you buried something else instead." He looked at her, confused. "You buried the fear in me, the part that believed I was cursed to be alone, that love could only bring pain." Elias's jaw tensed, then relaxed. He said nothing. He only reached out, slowly, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his touch. No vows were spoken, no promises made. But the next morning, Elias took up his spade and began to dig a new trench around the perimeter of the cabin, a rain trench, wide and deep. Later, he split fresh pine logs and began shaping fence posts. Sarah watched from the doorway, Willa in her arms. He did not look up, but he knew she was there. Each strike of the hammer, each foot of fence, each board nailed to the new back wall, spoke one clear truth louder than any ring or chapel could. "I will protect you. I will stay. This is your home now, too." And for the first time in years, Elias Boone was not building to keep the world out. He was building to hold something in. 12 winters had passed since that night. Sarah stumbled through the storm, clutching a child the world had already buried. Now, under the same Montana sky, the snow still came heavy and white, but the cabin it blanketed was no longer a place of exile. It was a home, solid, warm, and filled with the quiet music of life. Willa Boone, 12 years old, stood outside beneath the pines, gathering herbs with practiced fingers. Her skin was sun-brushed, her dark hair braided neatly down her back. Her eyes, deep and watchful, were a perfect blend of her mother's softness and her father's stillness. She moved with quiet purpose, a pouch slung at her side, stopping now and then to speak gently to the plants she picked, just as Elias had taught her. Just as her real father, Catan, once had whispered to the wind. Inside the cabin, Sarah sat at the table, worn leather journal open before her, pen scratching slow across the page. "The day I came begging for someone to bury my child was the day something inside me died," she wrote. But Elias did not bury her. He breathed life into her, and somehow he did the same for me. The fire crackled beside her. She paused, looked toward the doorway where Elias stood, carefully adjusting a poultice on an old man's wrist. The man was Shoshone, a neighbor from the valley. Yesterday, they had treated a settler woman's child with fever. Tomorrow, they would ride down to the trading post together, Willa translating between Comanche, English, and broken Spanish. The Boones were no longer hidden. They were known, respected, needed. Elias finished wrapping the bandage and handed the man a pouch of dried bark. He said few words, but his eyes were kind. Sarah remembered when those eyes were filled only with ghosts. He caught her watching and offered a soft smile. She returned it. Later that evening, as the sun melted into gold behind the ridge, Elias took his carving knife and stepped into the trees beside their home. Willa followed, curious. He found an old pine, weathered, thick, and ran his fingers over its bark. "What are you doing, Pa?" Willa asked. He looked at her, marking something I don't want to forget. With slow, deliberate strokes, he etched the words into the trunk, not deep, but clear. When he finished, he stepped back. Willa read it aloud. "She's still breathing, and so am I." That night, the three of them sat by the fire. Willa rested against Sarah's shoulder, a book in her lap. Elias carved a new toy in his hands, a wolf this time, for Grizz, now gray-muzzled but loyal as ever. The wind whispered through the shutters, but there were no distant gunshots, no fear riding in on hooves. Only the peace that comes after long silence, after wounds begin to heal. Sarah glanced down at her journal, left open beside her. "Some love stories do not begin with kisses," she had written. "They begin with a knock on the door, with blood in the snow, with breath returning to a child's lungs. And sometimes they end without words, just a fire, a family, and a life reclaimed from the edge." The flames danced, the cabin stood tall, and outside, beneath the pine tree bearing Elias Boone's quiet testament, the snow fell gently, not to bury, but to bless. In a land where mercy was rare and love even rarer, one man chose to save instead of bury. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of forbidden love, survival, and second chances on the American frontier. We bring you new stories every week, rich with emotion, grit, and romance that defies the odds. Join us, and remember, where bullets missed, hearts didn't. Subscribe now, and never miss a heartbeat from the Wild West.